Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, Black women around the world. Welcome to Freedom at the Crossroads, this channel. I am Tonya Barango, the self care maven, and I help Black women over 40 look better, feel better without the pressure of other people's expectations. I help you reclaim your life and liberate yourself through self care here on this channel. I talk lifestyle, I talk work life balance, I talk empowerment via the vehicle of self care and self love. These are foundational to any healthy lifestyle, particularly for women, knowing what we have gone through under patriarchy, y'all. So, I just wanted to get back to today's topic, and it sounds probably a little melodramatic, but it is real. I am here to tell you, in almost like a form of a letter, dear Black women across the world, particularly here in the diaspora, here in the US of A, self care is a weapon. It's time for the gloves to come off and acknowledge the landscape of what we are facing and have been facing as Black women. From the continued regression of fetal and maternal health, from, misogynoir, patriarchy, all the things that unfortunately intersect with the Black female body. We've been mules for social justice movements. And the toxicity, let's not talk about the toxicity in the workplace. I mean, we have been going through it. And so, for many Black women and other women of color, self care as a concept, let's just be real, self care as a concept and a practice has been far beyond the reach of many of us for many reasons. And that's the average Black woman across the board. It doesn't matter what social economic, class you come from. It doesn't matter how much education you have. Across the board, this is the lived reality for the majority of Black women across the board. For many, self-care, like I said, it's just something you aspire to or something you daydream about, like that fantasy vacation you might take somewhere down the road when you, one, have the money, two, have the time, three, have the resources, and four, have the health and well-being to even carry out any of this. And that's the irony. Today, I'm here to ring the self care liberation bell by letting you know that self care is both the weapon and the key to your liberation. So, why am I telling you all of this? Okay, I'm telling you this because in order for you to reclaim your health, learn to love and value yourself, break the unhealthy and maladaptive, let's be real, maladaptive conditioning of self sacrifice, people pleasing, and that grinding exhaustion, you first need to be aware of your current state and what's at stake if you don't do anything about it. Now, I've got just a few reasons I'm going to list. It's going to seem like a long laundry list, and I'm going to go down here on my notes here because it's a lot. I don't want to overwhelm you, but I do want to drive this home to you today because we are living in uncertain times. A lot is going on, and it's not just here in the US of A and the diaspora on this side of the world, but we have all these different things happening across the globe that disproportionately affect Black women. And that's Black women whether you're living in Europe, Black women whether you're living in on the continent, Black women whether you're here in North America or the Caribbean or somewhere else in the diaspora. These are things we are dealing with. Exhaustion. Exhaustion will overwhelm you and keep you constantly trying to keep your head above water as you struggle to continue to give from a place of emptiness, child. running on fumes. You're literally running on fumes. You will stay and continue to get even more unhealthy, dysregulated hormones, hair loss, depression, you name it. Resentment and toxicity will poison you and all of your relationships. You will more than likely develop chronic illness, severely limit your life expectancy. You're going to suffer from acute regret and dissatisfaction will be your legacy. Now, if you're not already experiencing that to the max, just imagine if you continue in this cycle of not accessing, utilizing self care in your life at this present time. If you don't adopt self care, if you don't gain access to self care in practical terms, these are some of the things you're going to have to contend with throughout your life and at the end of your life. And finally, you will leave this earth in bondage, having never developed your gifts, evolved and or lived a life that was truly yours and full of the joys of life that's healthy, full, and on your terms. How many times have you heard stories of women in your lineage, just women in general, and older women, much significantly older women, our grandmothers, our aunts who've been worn and ground down and in exhaustion, and they just have this helpless look of, oh well, that's just the lot of a woman. I remember sitting down as a child listening to you, because we kids, our ears are always open even to things that we're not typically supposed to be listening to. But I will never forget the time that I was listening to my mom just recount with some other women their experiences of living as a woman in a black body. Now, granted, I've heard these stories both here in the US and on the continent, I because of my life and the way our family moved around this planet, I had the opportunity to live both here in the US and on the continent. And one thing that both groups of black women shared in their stories was the exhaustion, being ground down, the giving from a place of emptiness, running on fumes, constantly prioritizing people and other things, community, laboring, all of that just taking from you. And there was just this so entrenched conditioning that women were like, it was like they were in a haze, and they were just conditioned and zombified into accepting their lot in life. And this is pre-internet, okay? This is pre-internet. So you don't have women from all over the world sharing the similarities in their lived experiences of women as laboring and all of that, and toiling and living on the altar of other people's expectations. Women globally for generations have been conditioned to deprioritize themselves, to sacrifice themselves on the altar of other people's expectations, and other people being other people, systems, whatever you want to call it. The one thing they have in common, or rather the two things they have in common, is exploitation and the devaluing of female labor. Now, when you add for the black woman, this is particularly grim because you have these points of intersectionality, especially in a world where there's anti blackness. And then here in the US of A, we have state sanctioned violence, and that is both overt and implied. And that goes from every sphere of operation and existence as a black person. Black women have to deal with this. Black men have their version that they have to deal with navigating racism, discrimination, and all of that. But women, black women, get double doses of that every single day. And so when you contend with the fact that you're not accessing self care, you're not practicing self care, that's just one sad story with ultimately one sad end. So when I say that self care is a weapon, it truly is. And I am so tired of these colonized versions of self care that are perpetuated across mainstream media and by quote unquote dominant culture that is so sanitized and decontextualized from the lived experience of the people that need to access this thing, this life saving, critical practice. Now, back to my flow with self care and self care as a weapon. Self care is the weapon and key. Like I said earlier, self care is both a weapon and key to overcoming and changing these outcomes that I listed previously. And just here are just some of the benefits of self care. And this is why I always come back to it. This is literally not just my mantra, my mission, my passion. There is power in self care. And that's why self care is not cute, is not going to be pretty, and it's definitely political. Now, for all of you who are addicted to social justice warrioring, this is one thing that you actually should be embracing versus, the superwoman, the cape that you wearing and setting yourself on fire for other people's benefit. Okay, let me go down my list here. One, it activates your mind and interrupts the cycle of mind numbing exhaustion that keeps your mind fogged and confused. When your brain is scattered, literally scattered, confused, fogged out with exhaustion, you can't contemplate anything, one, that's in your best interest. You can't see any paths outside of where you are currently existing. You're in a fog. You're literally a zombie with no power and no agency. Self care is a cure for that. It's the weapon against that. That's why I said it's a weapon and a key. It helps you establish boundaries and values between yourself and others. And this is where it gets really, really good and really, really edgy. When you start setting boundaries based on the activated mind, things are going to get very interesting. They're going to get very interesting because all of those things, systems, whatever you want to call it, people that benefited from your lack of awareness, from your zombification, boundaries are the enemy of that. Because boundaries intrinsically speak to a reclamation process. You are reclaiming and making decisive contracts regarding how you will interact with other people, how they will interact with you, what is acceptable to you, what is not acceptable to you. But if you don't have an activated mind, if you're still in that conditioning, that fog, that fugue, that zombification, All of that just goes right past you as you continue to spin on that hamster wheel going nowhere. Self care forces you to center yourself in your own world and challenges skewed perceptions of self worth, labor, etc. Self care also teaches you to advocate for yourself, and by extension, it empowers you to reclaim your autonomy as a human being first. Then comes you as the woman. You are a human being who's worthy of value simply because you exist. You are literally claiming your humanity when you begin to self care. Isn't that powerful? By activating the mind, literally turning on the lights in the house that's called your head, you begin to engage the body in the physical activities needed to maintain a healthy body. Physical activity helps with hormone regulation, gut and mental health, chemical processes activated by mechanical kinetic activity, which in turn increases longevity and quality of life. In other words, an activated mind is an activated body. You are not zombie anymore. And if you want a hard, cruel, ratchet vision of somebody who's not self caring, someone who is not tapped in and aware of their state and trying to change it and move it to the next level, I want you to envision The Walking Dead. You know those zombies in The Walking Dead? Those ones. An activated mind. That's where self care begins. If you don't become aware of your situation, and I'm not a therapist, I have no licensing in that area, that is not my wheelhouse. I do have a therapist, my own, and any mental health professional will tell you it starts up here. And that is why oppressive forces, what did they do? The first thing, when colonizers came to start stealing and snatching people and doing all this crazy evil here on this continent, what they were doing to black people and indigenous people, especially the women, their goal was to break the mind. Why? Because that's where the power lies, in the mind. Self care begins in the mind. It's not all of this colonized, whitewashed crap of consumerism and commercialism where you pop a pill, you take all these chemicals masquerading as vitamins and special nutrients and drinking them down as powders and all of that. Not that some of that isn't actually good, mind you. Herbs and other supplements, they do help and contribute to your health and well-being. However, that is not the source. Okay, I think you guys can hear somebody's got a cat that's wandering around outside my condo door, and that's just a distraction. But anywho, my point is self-care as it's truly meant to be practiced, and that's why it's important as a black woman and as a black person with roots in the indigenous peoples of this planet, and rooted in a lineage that goes back centuries, that is connected to the earth. Your self-care cannot be disconnected from that, and that's why awareness is so important. Just like we have here with we have issues with the quality of the food that is grown and produced here in this country, where it does not nourish, and in a lot of instances it poisons. Why? Because the earth that it's connected to, that it is drawing from, is depleted. And you have all these synthetic chemicals that have been pumped into them. And because multi-global, big pharma, which is all, these are just different names for colonizers and exploiters and oppressive forces, because we're there's colonized food, there's colonized land, there's colonized people. So all of these exploitative systems are replicated at every level, and that's why awareness, coming to self, is so key to this whole self-care process, and healing and moving and evolving and getting where you need to be as a Black woman. So in going back to, you know, how self-care is a weapon and what it does and helps you achieve, I'm going to move on to the last couple few of the last points. And your ear might perk up a little bit in case you didn't know. Exercise also affects sexual and reproductive health. Exercise is a component of self-care. I'll leave you with that. Self-care brings mental clarity, focus, and the ability to self-regulate in powerful ways that empower and liberate the mind to fully explore your world without limit. You are your only limitation. Self-care is a pathway for that. I teach that self-care is foundational, not just to your overall health and well-being, but it's foundational to your elevation, your development as a human being on all levels. And if you truly want to be connected, truly aware, truly evolved and growing into who you want to be, unapologetically as you are meant to be, as the blueprint on this planet, you've got to tap into that. Self-care forces you, it literally forces you to break the condition of generations of devalued labor and exploitation. Self-care bucks the systems of oppression and exploitation of female labor and resources. No is a complete sentence, y'all. I'm going to limit it to that because I don't want this video to be too much longer. It's almost 30 minutes long as it is, and I've only got 2 more points to get to. Self-care forces you to recognize and to throw out that myth of the savior, of that quote-unquote white knight. You know, that white savior. No one is coming to save you. The power of autonomy and the myth of the savior coming to rescue you. Oh my goodness. This is what manipulators and oppressive systems fear, and this is why they respond. You know, this is what they fear, and this is what they respond. This is why they respond with violence, overt and implied. Because when you recognize that nobody is coming to save you, you begin to realize and reclaim your freedom from external control or influence. And the one thing that oppressive forces thrive on is someone who's disempowered. And no one is more, you know, as a concept or just as a observation in strictly in general terms. No one, at least in terms of perception, is more disempowered than the Black woman. One, she's got all these points of oppression via intersectionality. There's patriarchy, which is the father of all this toxic BS. You've got misogyny. Then you've got the misogynoir, the black version. And you know, there's one thing about black people as a collective. We're always going to put it on 10 and we're always going to excel. And that's why, in spite of oppressive forces that have tried to keep us bound and in bondage, we always thrive. Well, these are some of the maladaptive consequences of that too, misogynoir. Because not only do you have the racist patriarchy and misogyny, but then you have the black version of that too. And that's a whole nother rant for a whole nother video. But the point of the matter is, self-care for black women is not a trivial thing. It is super important, especially now that we begin to access self-care and get strategic about how we do that. And so that's why I had to come on today and speak on this and just drive home, because I keep hearing, even in my own field, I work in healthcare, I work in the laboratory sciences, and there is one area, one field. This is just one field in particular. I'm just narrowing out this one because this is the field I work in, the arena I work in, and it's healthcare. Healthcare has become extremely toxic, whether you're in nursing, whether you're in the laboratory, whether you're in other forms of patient interacting, billing, insurance, all the ugly manifestations of institutionalized racism, discrimination, patriarchy, misogyny, they all come to live in this field as well. And this is because, largely, at least in my perception, healthcare is where everyone exists. And regardless of your ethnicity, your race, your culture, it all comes there because why? Everybody gets sick. Everybody dies. All these spaces where you have such a huge conglomeration of peoples from all walks of life, and then you add to that toxic and discriminatory, oppressive forces and exploitative forces, nothing good happens there. Healthcare has been commodified to the nth degree that it's literally killing people. You add all these oppressive systems in there, and it just becomes a horrific nightmare. Now, anytime you're dealing with human beings in general, things get complicated. Human beings are messy, right? Even in an ideal world. But when you have oppressive forces acting in those spaces, exploitative forces acting in those spaces, things get particularly grim. And we as black people, particularly black women, we have been the most unprotected. And so we're the most vulnerable. And not by choice, more by conditioning and circumstance, black women are the canaries in the coal mine. A lot of women, too, work in healthcare, particularly in nursing, laboratory, customer service, billing. And so you have all of this mixing together. Now, when it comes to how do black women, how do we make self-care more accessible to black women? One, it starts with understanding the systems that are in operation around you. So that calls for what? Again, awareness. You can't make a decision, you can't get a plan, you can't take action if you're not dialed in up here. And when you're exhausted and when you are running on fumes, that's really difficult to do. And so, this is why self care for black women has to be so different. Not by choice, but by necessity. It has to be adaptive and it has to be strategic. Because why? We have all of these systems and other institutions that historically we've had to navigate in specific ways, and we have to be adaptive. And we still have to employ a lot of these adaptive strategies, even when it comes to self care. So, in order to make self care accessible for black women, we have got to inject those strategies and resources into the whole realm of how we um, want to access self-care, and then it becomes open to us. But trying to access the version of self-care that is by default close to us, and I'm talking about the colonized what version of it, where you constantly see on social media, flipping through just about any feed you can imagine, some out of touch person who's using some colonized practices from some other indigenous culture and has made a hodgepodge in some soup that they've packaged and turned into a commodity for allegedly everybody to tap in and buy. That's not for us. Our version of self care is community based, it is spiritual, and it calls to and harkens to our ancestral connections, like it or not. I'm talking things like hoodoo if you're talking spiritual, but there are other natural practices that we need to return to. Sankofa, we need to return to, reclaim, and pull back if we are going to make one, self care accessible for black women, make it sustainable, and one where it's not something that is out of our reach because we lack the resources, etc., etc. So I just wanted to share that with you today. My name is Tonier, the self care maven, helping black women look better, feel better without the pressure of other people's expectations. Can we please, 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 ladies, burn that cape? Stop setting ourselves on fire for the comfort of other people. Till next time, stay tuned.